I'm Annette Gordon-Reed. I'm the Carl M. Loeb University Professor at Harvard University. I wrote a book about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings back at the end of the 90s, not because I wanted to prove that Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings had children together. I was more interested in the way historians wrote about the subject. I've been interested in Monticello and slavery at Monticello for a long time, since I was in the third grade actually, and had been reading over the years about the place and came later on to the story about Sally Hemings, the story that he had several children with a woman enslaved on his plantation, that is to say Sally Hemings, and the scholars disputed this notion and suggested that it wasn't true, that there was no evidence that it was true. Well, I knew from my reading that at least two enslaved people who'd been enslaved at Monticello, gave recollections, and they talked about Monticello, and they said this story was true. And I found myself offended by the notion that there was no evidence that it was true, because it was as if these people never spoke. And I thought it was strange that people who had been the victims of slavery would be treated as if they were the ones who were suspect, as if they were the ones who would be unbelievable when they told you what happened during slavery. So I decided to write a book where I looked at the arguments, tried to be as balanced as I possibly could, tried to find as much evidence for and against the story as I could, for the purpose of making the case that it was important to listen to the words of African American people who had lived under the system of slavery, that was not only the logical thing to do or the right thing to do, it was the moral thing to do. So I sat down to write the book, and as I wrote and as I gathered evidence, I began to realize that there was much more evidence for the story being true than people had said, more than I even thought. So the book comes out in 1997, and a lot of people are persuaded about what I said, that the story was likely true. And then the next year, a man named Eugene Foster arranged to have a DNA test. He tested the descendants of members of the Hemings family, of the Jefferson family, and a family called the Carrs, the family that had been the descendants of the men who had been placed as substitutes for Jefferson. People said, well, the reason Sally Hemings' children look just like Jefferson, they are the kids of his nephews, the Carrs. So they tested these people and descendants, and the following year the DNA test came back and corroborated what I said, that it was likely true that Jefferson and Hemings had children, that the Carr story was not true. And so I felt vindicated by that, and a number of people thought I was vindicated by it. So even though I was happy about having science on my side, I actually liked the idea of using reason and judgment to come to an answer to the story, to the questions about the story, because I thought I had done that in my book, but I was glad to have the corroboration. Since that time, most scholars, most people who write about Jefferson and slavery, this has become an accepted story. I mean, there will always be people who doubt it, people who doubt all kinds of things, but it was important to me to take a stand, to say, slavery was an institution that took a lot away from African American people. And the least that we can do is to treat the reminiscences, the recollections of the people who suffered under that seriously. That it is the moral thing to do. And it's the way to find out much more about who we are as Americans. And it's vital to find out about our country and why we are where we are today. So that was my story, and that's why I'm glad I actually decided to write the book.